Rescue the Perishing. 439. After you've marked 439, if you would turn to 477. 477. Shelter in the time of storm. Sing verses 1, 2, and 4. If you'd like to stand, you may do so as we say, sing verses 1, 2, and 4. 477. The Lord's our rock, in Him we hide, a shelter in the time of storm. Secure whatever He'll betide, a shelter in the time of storm. Oh, Jesus is the rock in a weary land, a weary land, a weary land. Oh, Jesus is the rock in a weary land, a shelter in the time of storm. A shade by day, defense by night, a shelter in the time of storm. No fears of harm, no foes of fright, a shelter in the time of storm. Oh, Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a weary land, a weary land. Oh, Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a shelter in the time of storm. Oh, rock divine, oh, refuge dear, a shelter in the time of storm. Be thou our helper, ever near, a shelter in the time of storm. Oh, Jesus is the rock in a weary land, a weary land, a weary land. Oh, Jesus is the rock in a weary land, a shelter in a time of storm. Be seated, please. Brother Dave.
Well, good evening, beloved. Good evening to those that are joining us online. I'm grateful for your presence. And we, this evening, are going to continue to look at this mini-series, The 4 Rules That Govern Humanity. Just as a side note, Melody, the kids, and Joanne are about 4 hours away when they spoke to me last. So pray for them to get here safely with this weather that has been passing through. So as I said, we are going to continue our study of looking at the 4 rules. We began looking at the iron, the one that is furthest from the golden. And again, these are sociological. These are terms that have come and gone within the realm of people who study societies, who study cultures. And yeah, they may go by different names here and there, but predominantly you type in golden rule, silver rule online, you'll find this kind of stuff. And so we had the brass rule that is might makes right. I have the right to take what you have because I'm stronger. Brass is, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You strike me, I strike you. You leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. That's the only positive side of it. And now we are at the silver rule. And that one has a slightly positive side too. But this is the one that creates a culture that never goes beyond just not doing what is bad. There are people who live their lives who will say, well, I never rob, I never steal, I never do this, I never do that. But do you ever go beyond just not committing crimes? Do you ever go beyond just not sinning, if it's even possible? The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Imagine a world where everyone lived by one simple rule: do unto others what you would not want done to you. Do not do unto others what you would not want them to not do unto you. There would be no murder, no theft, no slander, no abuse. And if that is the only reason why you don't steal, if that is the only reason why you do not murder, is because you don't want it done unto you, something is missing within yourself. The idea was woven into the society that Jesus Christ found himself in. 500 years, give or take, before Jesus Christ delivered his Sermon on the Mount, a Chinese, philosopher named Confucius coined the philosophy of basically the silver rule and actually put it into motion. Do not do unto others what you would not want them to do unto you. And the Analytics, which is their, I don't want to say it's their Bible, but it is their governing book of philosophy. In the Analytics of chapter 15 and verse 24, a disciple named Zhigang came to Confucius and asked a pivotal question: is there one word which may serve as a rule for one to practice all of one's life? Confucius responded, reciprocity, explaining it with these exact words: what you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others. This idea of reciprocity, this idea of the silver rule, was not just limited to that side of the world or that culture. Centuries later, a famous rabbi named Hillel echoed this exact sentiment when someone asked him to summarize the entire Torah. And he said, what is hateful to you, do not do unto your neighbor. For the whole Torah rests on this. Go and learn. So we see across cultures, across languages and centuries, humanity independently arrived at the silver rule. And at first glance, there might be nothing wrong with this idea of the silver rule. It's a lot better than might makes right. It's certainly better than the brass rule: do unto others as they have done unto you. But the silver rule, though it restrains evil, it teaches people not to hurt others, which is good. It promotes morality and respect and decency, but is it enough? Is Christianity simply about avoiding what is wrong? Or is there more to the life of a Christian? Can a person spend his entire life doing no harm and still fail to do what God requires? I think he can. I know he can. Currently in America, according to the Pew Research, the civic default is silver. The American legal and secular framework is built heavily upon the silver rule of passive restraint. Citizens are expected to mind their own business, pay taxes, and not violate the rights of others. And so this is a picture of Hillel, the Jewish rabbi. So what is the spirit of the law? Well, societies need laws and rules to govern them, and the silver rule helps keep a society flowing in a direction. It allows them to maintain the status quo. But is that enough? Is that where we want to be? Do we want to live in a society where we do not do what is wrong, but we avoid doing what is right? You know, Paul had to address bits and pieces of this rule in Galatians chapter 5, verses 14 through 15. Galatians chapter 5, verses 14 through 15. And he's speaking to the church, and he's wanting them to know that there is more to their walk of faith. In Galatians chapter 5, beginning in verse 14, it says, "For the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another." You know, Paul is letting them know that it is not enough to just avoid doing evil, but it requires something else. This rule falls short because it places us in passive goodness, and we cannot be a society, we cannot be a church that never reaches out beyond ourselves. You know, it's not like I'm oppressing you or I'm being cruel. You do you, I do me. I'm not going to hurt you. You won't hurt me. And the only reason why I'm not going to hurt you is because I don't want it done unto me. And at first that seems like it's logical, but it creates distance. It creates a mutual respect for one another, but it does not create loving and active relationships. It's good that it dictates that we do no harm, but societies need more than just do no harm. This is what Confucius thought. Paul taught this element in Romans 13 and verse 10, love does no harm. But imagine a neighborhood, again, where no one commits crime, no one speeds, no one plays loud music, no one inconveniences someone else because they themselves do not want to be inconvenienced. Again, it is a law, it is a rule that restrains. There is very little output. It's more of self-control. And many who follow this rule will say, well, I don't owe you anything. And I'm not going to help you because I don't want you to come back around and find a time when I need help and cheat me out of helping me all the way because you believed that when I stooped down to help you, it wasn't good enough. You know, this is a very interesting element, and we're going to see how there is a parable that fits this ideology of why sometimes people do not help others. One, maybe they don't want to be inconvenienced, but two, they don't want the person to see that this help is limited or that they're cheated in some way, and so they don't want in return to be cheated when they need help. It's very interesting, but this is a sociological and a psychological phenomenon that happens. And so if it says, if I do help and it's not good enough, then when I need help, are you going to return the status quo? Are you going to return and help me in the same degree, the same manner of which I helped you? This is exactly what we see in the parable of the Good Samaritan. The text tells us and shows us what they did. They passed by the individual. And the text even gives us this idea that they went out of their way to avoid him even reaching out to them, calling out to them, because they themselves, one, did not want to be inconvenienced. I do believe that. But also, they don't want society to reach out to them, or they don't want to ever place themselves in a position to where they reach out to society and society does not help. And so if you completely avoid the situation, then everything is fine. And so this is why there in Luke chapter 6, where the lawyer asks the all interesting question to Jesus Christ, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? And we see that he is trying to beat around the bush, because the silver rule again puts restraints, puts limits on who you're going to interact with and who you're going to avoid. And so what are some of the dangers of the silver rule? Well, the silver rule is highly effective at keeping society from killing one another. But that's it. But returning to that road, I want us to look at Luke chapter 10, and that's what I meant previously. Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 30. Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 30. Look at what it says. Then Jesus answered and said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell amongst thieves, who stripped him of his clothing and wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. I believe that these individuals were following the iron rule. Might makes right. It says in verse 31, by chance a certain priest came down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. Both of these individuals are going out of their way. Now, they might be able to say, well, I did not rob him, so I don't owe him anything. I'm not the one who pushed him down. I'm not the one who left him half naked and half dead. And so I am free from any kind of moral requirement. Would Confucius or the Rabbi Hillel tell them or deem them guilty of inhumane treatment? No. They themselves did not cause the situation. And so they are following the silver rule perfectly. But Jesus uses this parable to show that the silver rule is lacking. It's insufficient for a boundary for morality. Because when the silver rule is the baseline for keeping the peace, and it does, but it cannot build a community. It sustains a community, but it does not build a community. And it proves that you can ignore someone simply by quoting the mantra, do no harm. It limits your potential for good. James chapter 4 and verse 17. We have sins of commission and we have sins of omission. We have sins of omission that we know that we ought to do good, but we do not do it. To him it is sin. We can see a need and we can restrain ourselves. But what also happens is we put on a mask of decency. Consider what Jesus reveals to us, what John writes in Revelation chapter 3. Beginning in verse 15, Jesus says, I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I could wish that you were cold or hot. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. The idea here, I see it, is that they're walking that line. They don't want to extend themselves. They don't want to go beyond what is just required to maintain the status quo. They're not willing to sacrifice. They're not willing to put forth effort. And so they are lukewarm. And even here, notice there is no blatant sin. Jesus Christ is not saying, oh, you're like the lascivious Thyatira or this or that. They're just hunky-dory, sitting on that line. But they've gone to an unhealthy extreme, a passive religion. And again, I believe that the majority of the church today is found within this lukewarm section. I believe that this speaks volumes of the church today as a whole. And so it causes us to miss opportunities to do good. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10, as you have opportunity, do good to all, but especially the household of faith. Yes, the church comes first. You pass two people on the side of the road, a Christian and a non-Christian, you help the Christian first. But the idea that only certain people deserve my help is preposterous. That only certain people deserve my help at a time is preposterous. And so we need to understand its limits. This is why the lawyer is trying to beat around the bush by asking Jesus, well, who's my neighbor? No. Many people do not want exact details. They want to follow the spirit of the law. They want to follow the idea, the big picture, but God wants us to, yes, follow the big picture, but also get down into the nitty-gritty, the details, because that is where the magic is. That is where the sweetness is in the details. And so what happens is it produces fruitless Christianity. Because if we are abiding in the doctrine of Christ, if we are abiding in Christ, then we are going to do the things that He says, live by His example. But if we're not, then we're just playing the Christian. And yes, we might use His words to simply keep us out of trouble. We don't steal, we don't fornicate, we don't gossip. That's all good. But are you going to do what else it says? And go beyond not fornicating, not swearing, not drinking, not doing the things that we're told not to do? Because it keeps us, as the church, from doing what we're created to do. In Ephesians 2 and verse 10, Paul reminds us that as the church, not as individuals, but as the church, we are God's masterpiece, created for good works. And so this idea of the blind rule, it blinds us with self-imposed righteousness. We can find the Pharisee in Luke 18 and verse 11 who's standing before the crowd and it says, look, I'm not like this man. I do this and I do that. I don't do this and I don't do that. I'm glad I'm not like him. But too many will be condemned on that final day. Jesus Christ in Matthew 25 speaks about those who just kind of walked the line. In Matthew 25, beginning in verse 41, Jesus says, "Then I will say to those on the left hand, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they will also answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger, did not minister to you?' Then he will answer them, saying, 'Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.'" And then we have their punishment, and they will go into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Those that were considered righteous, and we looked at that this morning, those who actively pursue righteousness, looked for opportunities to extend benevolence, both as the church and both as individuals. They went above and beyond. But it falls short of Jesus' standard of how we are to live, how we are to treat one another. Consider what Luke chapter 6, 32 through 36 says. This is a section where Jesus is speaking about doing good to those who hate you, and we'll look at more of this when we look at the golden rule. But in verse 32, he says, "But if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you?" It's not very difficult. It doesn't cost you much to love those who already love you. Okay, going on. "And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same." Again, it's not hard to do good to those who are doing good to you. Scratching your back, you scratch theirs. Lending. But if you, look at in verse 34, "And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you?" Again, it falls short of Jesus' standard. Imagine a field free of weeds. A field that is free of weeds. But unless seed is planted, what will it produce? You see, it's not enough to just have a life free of weeds. It is not enough to just live a life avoiding doing evil, avoiding doing harm, if you're not actively, intentionally pursuing good, living the life that you ought to live, looking for those opportunities. You know, the silver rule, yes, it focuses on avoiding harm. The response is passive. The great example is the priest and the Levite. They did not cause the situation. They don't want to upset the man by helping him to a limited degree. They don't want to be inconvenienced as well, and so they pass by the other side. The motivation for the silver rule is self-preservation. The only reason why I'm not going to break into your house is because I don't want my house being broken into. And the outcome is, again, missed opportunities. But we're going to see that the golden rule focuses on doing good. It aims to actively love, bless, and meet the needs of others. That is what agape love is. Seeking to establish a relationship, but also seeking what is best for the individual. The response of the golden rule is active. I will help you because you deserve it. You need it. What good can I do for you? The example is the Good Samaritan. Again, let's go back to Luke chapter 10. Because this is how we can avoid, how we can overcome it and avoid our lives being like this. Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 33. "But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion." This reminds me of Jesus. Jesus Christ, when he was feeding the 5,000 and the 4,000. Even the rich young ruler. Those instances make a point to remind us that Jesus saw them and was moved with compassion. Jesus looked at him and loved him. The golden rule responds differently. Continuing here in Luke chapter 10, "But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came, so he had compassion, so he went to him and bandaged his wounds." Okay, he could have stopped there, but he did not. He poured oil and wine and set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. There's a whole bunch there that we don't know what transpired, taking care of him. But he could have stopped there. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, "Take care of him." He didn't have to do that. "And whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you." You didn't have to do that either. You see, the silver rule does not allow someone to progress past simply not hurting someone. You know, we think about maybe this is why the Jewish nation was such a mess when Jesus came around. Because they had left the doctrine of the Old Testament. Because even in the Old Testament, under the law of Moses, you were supposed to actively pursue good and do good to the stranger when he comes into your assembly. Treat him as a brother. But they had grown away from that. And they became something different. And so we need to overcome this by simply seeing it's not enough to just not kill, not do harm. But we need to be like Christ. We need to be like Christ because Christ did many things and not all of them are recorded for us. John chapter 21 and verse 25. But the things that are recorded for us are to show us the life, the example that Christ is, 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 21. Christ simply did not refrain from condemning us. He actively pursued a way to redeem us. Galatians chapter 3, 13 through 14. What he brought to the table was not the scraps, was not the bare minimum, but it was justification. By waters of rejuvenation, by the renewing of our mind. Titus chapter 3, verses 1 and 6 shows us something quite interesting. Titus chapter 3, verses 1 and 6. It says, "Remind them to be subject to the rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work. To speak evil of no one, to be peaceable, gentle, showing all humility to all men. For we ourselves were also once foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving various lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another. But when the kindness and the love of God our Savior toward man appeared, not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to his mercy, he saved us through, again, this washing and regeneration, whom he poured out on us this abundantly through Jesus Christ our Lord." The New Testament shows us there is a greater way to live. There is a better way to live. That we cannot be as the priest and the Levite who, when we see an opportunity, we pass by on the other side because we convince ourselves, well, I didn't cause the situation, so I'm free. I'm excused from any kind of responsibility. Compassion is more than just wishing well or feeling sympathy. You know, I like the equations that we find in the Bible. James has the equation for sin, how sin, we're drawn away by our lust, and when lust is conceived and it brings forth fruit, it produces death. Well, in 1 John chapter 3, in verses 16 through 19, we have another equation. Opportunity plus ability equals responsibility. He says, "By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us. And we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren." Verse 17, "But whoever has this world's goods, opportunity or ability, but whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need," opportunity, so ability, opportunity, "but shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My my little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And by this we know that we are of the truth, and shall assure our hearts before him. There's a benefit to actively pursuing love and actively pursuing what God commands us, because it assures our hearts. We can have a confidence. We can know that we're doing what God is demanding of us, and so we can have that confidence that we are pleasing God. Consider the importance of how important it is to have true biblical faith. Faith without works is dead. And so we need to have that working faith. We become like the Samaritan, the opposite of the priest and the Levite. We become like Jesus. You know, the difference between the silver and the gold, it is intentional action. The silver says, I won't hurt you. The gold says, how may I serve you? We can think of all the different societies that have come and gone. We can think of our own society. Have you ever considered how many laws are there about preventing bad? Think about the laws here in Cowan. How many laws are there that are simply about preventing bad? We got speed limit signs. We got stop signs. We got laws on the books about graffiti, loud noises past a certain time. But how many laws can you think of, local, nationwide, that actually demands and promotes you going out beyond yourself? I can't think of many. That is why, as a society, the silver rule, it allows us to function. But you're not going to get to heaven because you are a good American or a good Tennessean. I can't think of many laws on the books that demands you reaching out beyond yourself to do good. The silver rule is what we live by here in America. This is what our judicial system is built upon. Do not do bad because you don't want it done unto you. And the punishment is kind of, you rob someone, there's a punishment. You kill someone, there's a punishment. But you see a need and you don't do it, it's okay. You didn't want to place yourself in any undue burden. You didn't want to place yourself in a risky situation. But as Christians, God demands much more of us. He demands much more from us. To not live as the man who is looking out for himself. To live as the man who just does not want to do harm simply because he doesn't want done unto him. Nowhere in the silver rule does it speak about the heart. Loving your enemy, loving your neighbor. You can despise someone, you can hate someone, and you can live by the silver rule and say, I'm not going to kill you even though I want to, because I don't want you or any of your buddies to come back and do it to me. That's not enough. And so next week, we're going to look at the golden rule, and we're going to look at how do we actively live it? What is it going to cost us? And where and who else may have coined the term, the golden rule? Who else has lived by the golden rule? And what you're going to find out that is very interesting is this ideology of the golden rule did not start popping up until after the teachings of Jesus Christ. In some of our religions today, across the world, that did not exist at the time of Jesus, did not exist before the times of Jesus, but they came about after or during the times of Jesus. They have taken on these aspects of the golden rule, and we'll look at that next week. Or the following week, because next week is the song service. But imagine you're on that road to Jericho, and you watch this play out. You're off to the side, maybe you've stopped to rest your animal, and you see the priest, and you know in your mind, oh, he's a priest. He's going to go help this man. But he doesn't. You see a Levite. Oh, the Levite's going to help this man. But he doesn't. And then you see someone who society does not like. Someone who society has no value for. He's a Samaritan. Remember, the Jews hated the Samaritans even more than the Gentiles, because they were half-breeds in their minds. And this person who you did not expect went above and beyond, did not just stop with bandaging him, did not just stop with pouring some medicinal oils on him, did not just stop by taking him to a place of rest, but continued to administer. Again, we don't have all the details. Again, it's a parable. And then left funds for further maintenance, further benefit and help. That speaks volumes of the type of people that we should be. A people that, yes, we put ourselves out there. And yes, doing good should cost us something. We cannot live by, that's not my problem. Someone else will take care of it. When I was studying criminology in college, there was this one case during the 1970s that a woman was being brutally murdered. Every single neighbor heard her cries for help. But every single neighbor that was interviewed said, well, I thought someone else would call the cops. No one called the cops. She was brutally murdered. And if I remember correctly, over 12 households heard this woman's screams for help. And none of them called the cops because they thought, oh, the Jones will get it. The Roberts will get it. They wanted to avoid it. They did not want to interfere. The gospel of Christ is designed by God to dismantle the iron, to dismantle the brass, and even the silver, because none of them are good enough. None of them will get you into heaven. It's not enough just to not hurt. We must be active in our faith to do good. We must be active in our lives to look for opportunities to do good. So maybe you're here this evening and you're not yet a Christian. Maybe you're watching online and you have questions. We would love to sit down with you and study with you. And so you book chapter and verse what is required of you to become a Christian. This is not according to our tradition, our opinion, my tradition, my opinion, but rather book chapter and verse, and we have adopted it because it is the only way. Only the Bible makes Christians. And so we have to read and study and see what God tells us. But maybe you are a Christian, and maybe you have fallen into living a life of passiveness. Maybe you are living a Christian life to where you say, well, I'm doing enough because I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. Okay, it's good that you're not doing this or you're not doing that. But are you doing this? Are you doing that? Are you avoiding doing this or doing that? We have to live a life of more than just passive restraint and active obedience. If anyone has any need this evening, please come forward as we stand united and as we sing.
Rescue the perishing, care for